welcome Leader Sykes, Representative Amelia Sykes. You are the head of the minority or the minority leader in the Ohio State House.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal. We're all big fans of you here at Red Wine and Blue. Thank you for your leadership and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Okay. The reason why we asked for you to come today, of course, is that it has been a wild week in Ohio. And I think a lot of us are wondering what the heck is going on. So we were supposed to vote on March 17th if you hadn't already voted by mail or voted early, which is what I did. But last minute cancellation, late at night, the night before the election. There was all kinds of confusion and chaos. The next morning, reading all the coverage, you know what my big first takeaway from all of this was? Oh my gosh, did Amelia Sykes call this or what? It's true, you called all of this. You knew that voters and poll workers and local boards of election were concerned about voting on election day. This virus is a really scary thing, and we are all trying to not just protect ourselves and our families, but our communities, society at large, by staying home. And so the idea of having to make that choice between, do I go out? I can keep my distance, but we're all supposed to be staying home and voting, our constitutionally protected right. You called it. You were trying to get the state legislature to come back into session to address these concerns, but they didn't. And you are the minority leader, not the one deciding when to come back into session. So all you could do is urge and call for it. That didn't happen. So we ended up with quite the election eve drama and a lot of voter confusion. And I think that it was absolutely right for Dr. Acton, who is head of the Ohio Board of Health, and we've all been getting so much good information from, to have called off voting on March 17th because of that stress people had about concern, for community health. But she shouldn't have had to do that. It shouldn't have come down to the last minute and caused all that confusion. We could have been ahead of this, if everyone had listened to you. So, all right. So thank you for coming and telling us where things are today. But honestly, I would just love to hear from you. Like, I was thinking what your night must have been like, the amount of whiplash you must have been going through. Because I know primary candidates, it was crazy, and you were in the midst of it all. Just like walk us through what was going on.
Sure thing, Katie. And thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to share, at least from my perspective, what Monday night was like. And quite frankly, Monday was just like many other days in the legislature when we have people who just aren't willing to take every consideration under consideration. And there's a lot of scrambling and missed deadlines. And not to make it seem like we're totally dysfunctional, but sometimes we can be pretty dysfunctional because people just aren't really listening to what's happening. And sometimes steady leadership that women provide. And I've said a lot in the last couple of weeks, we need a lot more women running this country and the state. And that is certainly going to continue to be one of my primary goals in life and life's mission. But I digress.
Those digressions are welcome. Anything you want to say about empowering women, electing more women?
Okay, I'm on brand, I'm on target. I'll keep doing that. So I'll throw that in there every once in a while. So the one thing that became very clear as all of us have been watching these press conferences with the governor is he drips out a little bit of information every day. And if you just pay attention to what he's saying, there's more coming. The next day it's going to get a little bit more expansive. And, we had been hearing for that past week that everything was safe with the elections. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. But then as the amounts of people started to decrease of who could be in a room, It was pretty clear that things were going to start to change relatively quickly. And so one of our leaders, Representative Stephanie House, she leads the Ohio Legislative Black Caucus, and she talked and she said, I think we just need to kind of get out ahead of this. And I said, you're right. So she put a letter out on behalf of the OLBC and said, we need to get the legislature together. She wrote it to the governor, to the Senate president, to the speaker, and listed out several different things that we needed to be working on. Not only elections, but economic packages, how we're going to support utility shutoffs. What can we do to protect our constituency as well as the election, our democracy?
And so this was like, what day was that?
That was Saturday. So we had been working on that Saturday. Yeah. I think it eventually went out late Saturday evening. Right. So just with enough time to start thinking about what it would look like to gather us back into session, even though we had been scheduled for it. And we've done it before. Now, remember over last year, there was an issue that was important with House Bill 6, and the speaker had reached out to the governor to get the State Highway Patrol plane to pull people back in from Chicago on a conference. So if there's will, there's way. Yeah. So this should have been just as important. So she sent that letter out on behalf of the OLBC. I followed up with listening to OLBC. We should be doing this. We've got to get back in and at least start thinking about some of these things to protect our citizens as well as our democracy and election day. It became abundantly clear on Monday when the Secretary of State had a press conference scheduled at 10 and then it got yanked that something big was going to happen. Yeah. And so unfortunately we have basically missed our time frame to start to do something. So it was for me just trying to figure out what is actually going to happen and then how can we keep this from being a major fiasco and harming people's ability to vote, because the last thing that we need to do is be the nation embarrassment, especially after we have been doing so well with the public response of protecting our citizens. And so, we watched the press conference and had gotten an idea of what was going to happen and started activating some folks ahead of time to make some decisions and getting people prepared and soften the blow a bit. And the most immediate thing that became so frustrating was during the press conference, the governor said that we are going to recommend that we move our election date to June 2nd. And we can't do the lawsuit. We can't file the lawsuit, but we know that there's a lawsuit pending and we're not going to oppose it. But that was translated as to the election is suspended, is delayed, and we have a new date. And headlines everywhere were saying this is the new date. This is what's going to happen. And the governor, he said in the press conference, he didn't have the authority to make that designation, except unless we were invaded by a foreign entity or something like that. But nonetheless, all of the headlines and what people pulled from that was everything had changed, and they felt as though they would still have an opportunity to vote because they had said it was going to be on June 2nd. Immediately, we just started trying to figure out how do we put this genie back in the bottle, because I learned very quickly in my first year of law school is you cannot predict what a judge will do. And I've worked for 3 judges, and they have their own abilities and experiences that they bring to the bench. And so it's, we can make suggestions and predictions, but you shouldn't. It's just a bad idea. You just wait until the judge decides and then you move from there. And so as I started seeing on social media, there were poll workers who were posting that the election is canceled. They were told through robocalls to send everybody back home. This was before the hearing had even started. And it just started to brew in such a scary way. And I just kept thinking, well, I really now hope that the judge is going to do what they've asked them to do, because if not, it's going to be really hard to undo it. And lo and behold, the judge said, nope, I'm not going to grant this injunction, and the election goes on as is. And it immediately became this, what do we do now? And to only complicate measures is our social media algorithms don't go chronologically anymore. And so we may have posted at one point it was delayed, and then something else happened, and then something else happened, but you can't follow it in chronological order. Yeah. And so that makes getting information and disseminating information really challenging and really hard. It creates, takes a platform where it should be helpful. It makes it even more incredible to give out bad information. So all of those things were happening. I spent a lot of time just going on people's websites I knew and Facebook, just as like influencers and people who have a voice in the community, and just saying, this is not accurate. Please, take these things down, adjust it to say this, so we can do the best we can with helping people calm down. But it was just so widespread. It was really hard to contain. And I worry about what happens to people who are already feeling disenfranchised, who are already confused and frustrated with the voting process. What have we done? Not only for this March 17th election, but for elections in the future, and who are they going to listen to and who will they believe? And so it's one of those things where, we've been trying to give everybody a little bit of grace, and we know this is uncharted territory and really hard times, but some of these things didn't have to happen. There have been people who are willing to help. We've extended ourselves as a caucus to be helpful. We want to be there. The legislature is a co-equal branch of government. There's no reason why the governor should just be doing everything on his own. And really, I don't appreciate having to have Dr. Acton, who's been a superstar in all this, take the heat for a decision that she was doing to protect the public safety. I mean, that could have happened earlier in the day. I mean, our governor is a former prosecutor and a lawyer. That could have happened earlier in the day, and we could have saved ourselves from all the process. And hindsight is 2020, and I don't want to be too critical of the governor and the actions, but after the fact and seeing all the people then say, now Dr. Acton needs to go, she doesn't know what she's doing. That's not the case. She did not change the election. She didn't have the authority to. The powers that she has been given when we declare a public health emergency does not include changing an election. What she did was close down the physical building.
Right.
Buildings where people could vote. And she has full authority to close down any building in a public health emergency, which she did. The practical application of it was the election couldn't happen. And so people couldn't vote on election day. And I understand, for some, if it's practical, it just is what it is. But legally, it makes a big difference. And she did not overstep her bounds. So if I can make anything abundantly clear, she did not violate the law. She did not violate the Constitution. She was doing what was completely within her powers as the Department of Public Health Director.
That makes a lot of sense, and sort of separating out, understanding what she did in terms of, for the sake of public health, protecting citizens of Ohio, saying, let's not gather in these places. We can't do that today. But what she didn't do, because she didn't have the authority to do it, and she didn't try to assert any authority to do it, was change the actual primary date. And I think there's so much confusion around that. We don't yet have a new primary date, or we're not sure what's going on going forward here. The date we've heard, of course, is June 2nd, because that's what the Secretary of State proposed, DeWine then followed to suggest, recommend. But, I've heard a lot of really legitimate concerns expressed with, we don't know where we're going to be at with coronavirus by June 2nd. Will it be safe by then? None of us really know the answer to that. And so I'm very curious about your perspective on how do we ensure a safe and fair election. And I think particularly, I really love your point about Ohio has been a model in many ways in dealing in this crisis, responding to the pandemic. People have been looking at Ohio. We've been responding to science, staying ahead of the game. What are we going to do now on voting?
So not sure yet. That is yet to be determined. And hopefully it is something that continues to be a model. One thing that scares me just a bit about losing that model status is that instead of it coming from the executive, where the governor is taking direction from a very strong science background and a woman who is leading and steady and just smart and overall just really thoughtful about this, it's now going to the legislature, which is in a Republican supermajority's hands, and folks who don't really think science is all that cool. And, voter disenfranchisement is fine if you don't have an ID. And why doesn't everyone have an ID? So that scares me a little bit. But we will certainly do what we can to adjust and make sure our voices and the expansion of democracy continues to happen. Since this will be an emergency measure, whatever we pass in legislature, it requires 66 votes out of the House and 24 out of the Senate. So that means that they have to include some Democrats, which is a good thing. A lot of times, if it's just a supermajority or just a simple majority, they don't need to include Democrat voices, and so that makes a big difference. And you can look at some of the laws that have been passed because, without us.
Yes, we have seen some of these laws that have gotten passed by supermajority.
Sorry about that. We're working on it. We're going to break that supermajority in November.
We know you are. We appreciate that.
Nothing going on there. But, in terms of keeping us safe, it is a legitimate concern of mine, and I hope to everyone else's, that June 2nd might not be a date where the coronavirus has come and gone. And to pick that date isn't particularly helpful. The governor said he suggested something in September, but we got a presidential election this year, and both the Republicans and Democrats have conventions in order to pick our nominee and it does not allow for us to do that. And so June was
Plus all these other races that are going on in Ohio that are so important on ballot,
and especially and including levies. There's park
Yes.
levies, school levies, and people need to start figuring out their budgets. And if we wait until September, and if they wanted to try to put it on the November ballot, if it didn't succeed, they lose all those opportunities. So there's a lot of considerations. You're absolutely right. So we don't feel, at least the members of our caucus, that it is necessary to create another in-person voting day, because we might just be where we are June 2nd. What happens,
I mean, no one is scheduling anything in person.
No.
So that actually makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
Think about it differently.
We think we're making a lot of sense. And so
you're so logical.
What we're trying to do is expand the opportunity for people to vote absentee by mail. And there's a little bit of an issue right now what we're still trying to figure out, but I think we can correct it through legislation for the people who sent in absentee applications after the Saturday at 12 p.m. deadline. So after 12 p.m. on Saturday, that was when you had to have postmark an application for an absentee ballot. Well, since then, the Secretary of State has been saying, well, just continue to send them to us. Well, he doesn't have the authority to do that either, because statutorily, the deadline was on Saturday at noon. So then what do people do? What happens to those applications that have been postmarked after that Saturday deadline? Right now, who knows? We can fix that next week when we're back in session, and hopefully it is something that we address. But we think that everyone who has not voted yet should receive an absentee application so that they can vote from home. We are going to also try to push for an electronic method or a non-mail-in method for people to access applications. I had a constituent who lived in a senior high-rise who is disabled and was wondering how was she going to vote? Normally she'd just go downstairs and vote, but they moved it to protect the safety and well-being of those residents.
Right.
Well, when I explained to her the process, she said, well, I don't have a printer. And how am I going to get this application sent in? And my wheelchair doesn't work. So I can't even, do these simple things that many of us take for granted. So she kept saying, why can't I do it online? Well, there's no ability to do it online, and state law doesn't allow for her to do it online. So that's one of those considerations that we're going to be working through, and hopefully we can get some support from our colleagues to do that. And then the other thing is, this needs to be free. Anything we've created, this barrier was created from not being able to vote on March 17th, and anything that requires people have to pay, to me, would be a poll tax. And we know poll taxes are illegal, should be illegal, and even the postage that might just be a couple of dollars might be cost prohibitive for some people, but it's not their fault. We shouldn't force them to pay for that. So we think that is a cost of burden that should fall on the state. That burden should fall on the state, because we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where people can't vote because they can't afford it. So there's a lot of things that we need to do, that we must do, and we're going to be talking to our colleagues and have been talking to our colleagues to put them in there. But we are really we want people to be enfranchised, and we want them to participate in this and make them as whole as we can after the debacle that happened on Tuesday.
Leader Sykes, do you think that vote by mail? Absolutely. I mean, just the fact that we are all looking to do things from a distance, let's call it vote from a distance, that's just what everybody's doing. Socializing from a distance. Why not vote? And it does make sense, considering, I would say, not just what we're going through right now as a country, but, we just can't predict the future, right? And I thought it was interesting. I heard Sherrod Brown, I read in the paper today, I think he said it somewhere last night, that he thought we should be looking at vote by mail nationally. And so I think that's interesting in terms of what could Ohio do to be a model in a positive way nationally, to really enfranchise people in these times of crisis, and making sure that people can have confidence in our democracy, in our election process, no matter what.
Yep.
We don't know what's coming at us, and we want to be strong as a state, as a country, no matter what. What do you think about the idea of vote by mail not just being like a temporary fix, but something we would do permanently in Ohio?
So I think that's a great idea, and something that I've always supported. One of the members of our caucus, Representative LaCour Hagan from the Youngstown area, she introduced a bill today. I believe she dropped it electronically, of course, a universal vote by mail bill that's modeled off of the state of Oregon, where everyone gets a ballot. And it's a little bit different in a primary election because you have to request your Democrat or Republican or Libertarian or issue only ballot. But those details can be worked out. But it's a great idea, and one of the things this crisis is going to show us is all of those things that people said could never be done. We figured out how to do them in the crisis, so why wouldn't we be able to expand them beyond? And that's beyond just our voting issue. That's like our unemployment compensation and why we really need to have paid sick leave, and not only just for those who are sick, but also for the people who are caring for those who are sick. And so hopefully this creates a national conversation around more than just voting, about what we have the capability and capacity to do if we only have the will to do it. And it's one thing that we talk about all the time with our colleagues. There's a lot we could be doing to help Ohioans and making sure that they can fulfill their Ohio promise. But when you've got folks who are just saying, we don't want to do it, it's not that they can't, they just don't want to. And there's a very big distinction between that, and we have to start highlighting it. And so this crisis will really highlight the can versus the won't, and let all of us see what the possibilities could be if we had a legislature particularly, and a federal government and a president who would be willing to be more thoughtful and caring of the people rather than of themselves, and whatever the party says they want to do. We're here to represent people and do the will of what our constituents, and we work for them, and that has to come through. Sometimes that's not what's coming out of the legislature, not sometimes, a lot of times. And so we can do better. And I
love this idea of there being an opportunity in crisis to turn this into something positive. We have got, it does feel like everything is so, it's making us all so anxious. It's a very disconcerting time, but we're Americans, we're Ohioans, we're women, we get stuff done. And so the idea of thinking about it, like just reimagining a little bit, like we're in a whole new territory. So what are we going to do with it? That's going to make us stronger for the future. That's really inspiring to think about it.
We got to find the silver lining in all of this. And beyond just, seeing who rises to the top, how our leaders are rising to the top, that's one thing, but also what Ohio could look like, and the things that we should be aspiring towards, and recognizing why we aren't getting those things. And it's often not just because we can't do it. Like I said, it's because we won't do it. And then maybe that means we got to get rid of those folks who won't let us do it, so we can get in people who can and will and who want to work for the greater good and the betterment of our state.
Well, you're definitely describing an Ohio that makes me, as a mom raising 2 young kids here, like feel like, that's the Ohio I want to raise them in. So as a practical matter, should anyone who has not yet voted in the Ohio primary, or we're waiting on a new election time or process, or, what should my husband be doing? He was planning to vote on election day. Should he be requesting that absentee ballot to vote by mail right now or not?
Yeah, that's a hard question because I don't know what we're going to do next week. And we've got a lot of ideas swirling around. And I think I alluded to this earlier. There are people who are currently requesting these ballot applications, but there isn't any provision in the law right now that allows us to accept them and for those folks to get ballots. Okay. And I even talked to the Secretary of State this morning, and I said, why are you still telling people to do this when we don't really know what's going to happen? And I think what the hope is that we address it in whatever it is that comes out of the legislature. And again, that's a lot of hope. And, worst case scenario, people request their application after the deadline that passed on Saturday and they have to re-request it. I don't want people to have to do that. That's burdensome. They should only have to do that one time. So the other option is just to sit tight and see what we come up with. But again, if you're willing to do it twice, please do it twice. Worst thing that can happen is you submit it and it is accepted, or it's not accepted and you have to do it again. But people just have to be aware of and that the fact that they might have sent one that might be invalid at this point, and they might have to do it the second time. So, you could do it now and do it later if you're willing to do it twice. You could wait. It's really hard one to answer. It'd be better safe than sorry to just do it twice, do it now, and then do it later if we have some different allowances. Because
I think what I'm going to do is keep my eye on your Facebook and Twitter. And then when you're like, go, 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 do this now, then, Red, White, and Blue and other platforms, other organizations working with people, I think that's partly on us, for us all to work together, get the word out, make it super easy in terms of promoting voteohio.gov, and make sure when people are really clear about what to do, that we can all feel empowered with that information and do it. But that's helpful to kind of know where things stand.
As soon as we know, we will send it out to as many people as fast as we can, as clearly as we can, and say the same thing over and over and over, so people have a little bit more trust in what we're saying and comfort that they won't be disenfranchised.
Right. Okay, so a couple more questions, and we've got a lot of people watching. If you guys who are watching do have questions, I've got my phone here, and I will try to get them in as well. But your statement that you put out, I do not know how late you were up that night. I saw it the next morning, on the morning of March 17th, when we thought we were going to vote and then not vote and then vote and then not vote. You said in that statement, I'm going to read it. This is why Ohio needs to update its archaic system and modernize voting like so many other states have, so we can adapt to emergencies. I hope the missteps we have seen tonight lead to a much deeper discussion at a later time about increasing accessibility to the ballot box. Can you just talk a little bit about, we've talked about vote by mail, but beyond that, are there other ways that you see, both to ensure public health, public safety, as well as our constitutional right to access the ballot? Talk a little bit more about how the other changes you'd like to see, and do you think that that's something we need to improve in Ohio?
So I don't think we have enough time to talk about all the changes that I would like to see, but we'll get to a couple of them. And over the past 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, we have seen a Republican-led legislature that has been dwindling down the flexibility of our Secretary of States to.
Yeah, we just have Golden Week, right?
Yeah, all of those things. And there's been so many lawsuits.
So much easier.
Same day voter registration, things we've been trying to encourage, automatic voter registration. That was a bill I introduced in my first term 6 years ago that we're still struggling with, and the ACLU's got a ballot initiative around it. There's plenty of things, but here's some interesting practical realities and like some nitpicky things that people just never even think of. And sorry if I'm boring you with these details, but one of the things that is an issue that we're going to have to deal with, because remember I said earlier, we want everyone who has not voted to receive an absentee ballot application. Well, the Secretary of State does not have the authority to do that. That law changed just a couple of years ago because Republican legislators did not want a Democrat Secretary of State to send out those applications without having to come to the legislature first. So again, that's introducing a bill, going through committee hearings, having 3 different hearings or readings, getting it passed out of one chamber, getting it to another chamber, getting it to the governor's office, just to send out absentee ballot applications. This, at one point, was a decision that the Secretary of State could make. Not anymore. And it was to limit the ability for him or her to give people access. So that's something that needs to change. And right now, our current Secretary of State, I believe, is willing to send out all of these ballot applications, but we have to change the state law to allow him the authority to do it.
Unintended consequences. They were trying to stop a Democrat, now stopping a Republican. This is misleading.
This is exactly what they intended to happen. There is nothing unattended about this one. But unfortunately, now we're in a situation that most people didn't even think of. And now we have to change the law and go through both chambers where we have some infighting between the parties and deal with that. So, that's one thing that just seems is so minor and could have been addressed easily, but the legislature made it harder.
Shouldn't even be political.
No, it doesn't be political. It really shouldn't. Why would we be restricting people's access to vote?
Right.
We talked about the universal vote by mail. It is something that I have done in my campaign, sending out ballot applications, and it has helped increase voter turnout. If I can do that in my little small district of 110 plus thousand people, why shouldn't we be doing that if we know it gives the results that we want it to? Unless there is a real desire not to have people to vote, which is what is happening. We know when there are fewer people who turn out to vote, Republicans fare better. When the voter turnout increases, Democrats do better in elections. And so when we're looking at all of these things, it is for political purposes, so that one party wins versus the other. And so I don't want anybody to think that as these decisions have been made or not been made, uh, it is totally for the consequences that have been intended. And it is working out fabulously for the Republicans. And that's why they have super majorities and they hold all 5 statutory offices. This was done on purpose. Gerrymandering is the way it is because of all of these rules. And so while we might think that one of these rules is inconsequential, it's not. They make a big difference about who's coming out to vote and who they're voting for. And there is no decision that gets done just arbitrarily. That is one thing I had to learn the hard way in the legislature. So there's no such thing as maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. People are very thoughtful about the decisions being made.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I know there's going to, and I've already heard the conversation about pulling back the powers of the health director. And I think that is wrong. I think that Dr. Acton has shown leadership and restraint in this, and she has not abused her power. People may not like what's happening, but it is for the benefit of the public's health. And so as we continue the conversations about who has what authority during emergency powers, there's some things that just aren't flexible enough, and some things might need to be restricted. So far, I haven't seen any restrictions that need to occur as of yet. But I for one am going to be a very strong advocate of keeping the powers of the public health director, because they aren't that broad. In a sense that you can close down any building, that seems very broad, but they're pretty thoughtful. And one of the things in doing that is making sure that we are letting folks know that one of those powers is not eliminating an election. That is just not one. And so in making sure that we have enough discretion in these issues, and these decisions don't have to go through the House and the Senate and get the governor to sign it or maybe veto it, then back to the vote chambers. Like, we can't do those things in an emergency situation. So we hopefully are electing leaders that we can trust, who may have some unilateral powers, but again, who have restraint, but also good leadership.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, I know that criticism has been out there of her, but when it comes to, who we're talking to, women across Ohio, that's not what they're saying about Dr. Acton.
No, not at all.
They are saying, thank you. That is a woman with power who is doing such an amazing job. She's got such an incredible story. She's a mom. She's out there like being the mom for all of us, I feel like, so I just, my only objection to this whole process is that you don't have more power. So
yeah, me too.
We're going to be cheering you on. Okay. I've really just got one last question.
Okay.
It's a red, wine, and blue themed question. So it's basically, how do you relax after a long day? That may or may not include a drink of your choice. There's no judgment if it does or it does not. We just enjoy festive drinks of all kinds here at Red, Wine, and Blue, but Lord knows you deserve it, Amelia.
Well, thank you. So I am a big fan of watching TV. I like the mindless entertainment after the end of the day, watching somebody else's life be crazy that's not mine. So that's usually how I unwind at the end of the day. And I love to hang out and eat and participate in an adult beverage if I have the opportunity. I have gone on a bit of an elimination diet at this moment because I've got these weird allergies. So my drink of choice is usually a sparkling water with a lemon and lime in a wine glass, which is always an interesting time to do this when I'm sure everyone else is probably turning to something a little bit stronger, but it's one of the best things to do. One of the tips that we give people in the midst of a crisis is limit their alcohol intake. I understand what the name of this group is, but it helps you be more clear-headed and responsive. So it works perfectly well. I didn't plan this diet to happen at the same time. It was mostly for health reasons, but it's worked out, and probably one of the reasons why you're so excited by my response, because I could stay up all night and get up.
You were on your game.
Yeah. So it was like, as you said, on that Monday, I went to bed really late and woke up very early because there was a Supreme Court decision at 1:30 or so in the morning that we were tracking as well to see what was going to happen for Election Day.
Yeah. Well, Amelia, we're called Red, Wine, and Blue because we believe we've got to change our state. We've got to change our country. But we also believe we're going to have a good time while we're supporting women to do it. And so, please just know that we're rooting for you. We're grateful for your leadership. And yeah, hopefully we can get some more women up there at the State House to join you real soon.
Absolutely. Please do. That would be my wish of all of you. And we've got a great group of members. We've got a really dedicated group of Women's Caucus members who are always on top of things, who are always pushing and advocating. And I'm so grateful for their leadership. They make my job a little bit easier with the work that they do and the heavy lifts that they pull for them, their communities, and for our caucus and for this state. And I appreciate them. I was on a panel that the AP put on, and I looked at the table and it was all the legislative leaders, and there's more guys named Larry than there are women. So that's kind of a problem. And then when I thought about that day, every single person, with the exception of me, who spoke was a man. So the 4 legislative leaders, the statewide office holders, and I said at that forum, we were talking about the issue of the statute of limitations on rape and what was the difference between the Strauss victims at Ohio State and the marital rape victims and those who had experienced it. And I said, the only reason why we're talking about it now is because they can see themselves as victims. These are men, mostly the victims are men. And this is why we need to have a government that's more representative, because if you don't, you'll continue to have poor representation and people not even thinking about what it's like to live and work or walk in someone else's shoes. And so as much as I like women and like to be around women and am like rah, it is a matter of how we really represent our community.
That's right.
And it makes a big difference. And so anyone who's interested in running, I always do this because you have to ask women 7 times to run. So run for office, run for office. Wait, here's my number. Run for office, run for office, run for office, run for office. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Run for office and one on good measure. So please, if you're listening, if you're concerned about it, if you're thinking that it's not for me, I don't have the qualifications, trust me. If you look at some of our bios, there are people who have very little life experience, educational experience. If they can do it, you can absolutely do it. So please join us in this fight, because we need those voices. We need your experience, because it does matter no matter what it is. You can be of value and an asset to your city council, your school board, your county council or commission, your state legislator, Congress. We need all of you to participate.
That's awesome. I mean, and the one thing I see again and again with these women who more and more are stepping up to run for office, the one thing they all have in common is, probably having been asked to do it 7 times, but also they've got a whole gang of strong women behind them, and so finding those women who are going to stand up with you and make you stronger in that strength, we're all about that too. So thank you for being so encouraging.
Of course.
All right. We know you got a load more to do today. We appreciate you. Thank you for being with us. And
appreciate you.